Good morning. I'm Kathy Webb, and on behalf of Women for Kansas, I'd like to welcome you to this very special program that is streaming live on the Women for Kansas Facebook page and is also being recorded for future viewing on the Women for Kansas YouTube channel. I especially want to thank you all for taking the time during this important Juneteenth weekend for being here to enjoy the program that we have prepared. We have viewers from all over the state, including chapter members of Women for Kansas and invited guests from Kansas Women Attorneys Association, Wichita Women Attorneys Association, and Women Attorneys Association of Topeka. It is my honor to introduce our esteemed presenters this morning. Justice Evelyn Wilson, who is a sitting justice on the Kansas Supreme Court, and retired Justice Carol Beier. Justice Evelyn Wilson is a native of Smith Center, Kansas. She received an undergraduate degree in business and economics from Bethany College in Lindsborg and a law degree from Washburn University School of Law. Before her appointment to the court, she was a district court judge in Topeka and chief judge of the third judicial district in Shawnee County. She was in private practice for 19 years prior to that. She was appointed to the Supreme Court by Governor Kelly in 2019. Carol Beier, who retired from the Kansas Supreme Court in September 2020, served as a justice on the Supreme Court for 17 years. She was appointed by Governor Kathleen Sebelius in 2003. And prior to that, she served as a judge on the Kansas Court of Appeals for more than 3 years. Only the third woman to serve on the Kansas Supreme Court, she was retained by voters in elections 4 times. She was previously a trial and appellate partner at Fulton Siefken Law Firm in Wichita, and she was also a visiting assistant professor at the University of Kansas School of Law. The format of this presentation will be in the form of a dialogue between the two speakers. Everyone will have an opportunity to post questions in the comments section of the Facebook Live video. So we encourage you to submit questions that will be submitted after the formal presentation, the dialogue that I spoke of, and our moderator, Ty Edwards, a leader in Women for Kansas, will receive and present those questions to the speakers. And now, without further ado, it is my extreme privilege to present Honorable Evelyn Wilson and Honorable Carol Beier.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you to all of you for being with us this morning. It's truly our pleasure to spend some time with you, to visit with each other, which we get too infrequent an opportunity to do, and to visit with all of you and kind of give you an inside peek to how the Kansas Supreme Court does its work, and a little bit more about one of its esteemed members. The way this will proceed is, for the most part, I'm going to ask questions of Evelyn, and she'll respond. I may chime in here or there. So we're going to talk to one another for about 35 to 45 minutes, and then we should have plenty of time at the end so that we can take questions from all of you who are watching. So please do, if you have questions, submit them through the mechanism Kathy just described, and we'll be happy to address them near the end of the presentation. Evelyn, obviously Kathy did a little bit of intro, but I'd like to just start with the most basic thing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about kind of your background, how you grew up, a little bit about your family, how you ended up pursuing the career path that you did.
Sure. Well, you have the skeleton, and I feel like whenever I'm going to talk about myself, which is a little uncomfortable for me, but I have to begin with how fortunate I have been on this journey that I've had, and how grateful I am for that good fortune. My roots in Kansas run very, very deep. I love Kansas. On my mother's side, my great-grandparents came over from Germany in the 1800s, and on my father's side, They also came over in the 1800s, and we have been farmers in Smith and Phillips County since that time. And so I was very, very fortunate to be born into a family who loved me and have always supported me. And I was able to watch how they were, and they had the utmost of integrity. And so I knew that I was expected to have integrity, and they worked hard. So I was expected to work hard. My father had a high school education. My grandfather had an 8th grade education. Mm-hmm. But education was always very, very important to my parents. And I had great teachers in Smith Center grade school, high school, even in college at Bethany and law school. I have always had wonderful teachers. And I like to tell the story about my dad to just give you an example of how important education was to him. Because when I was about 10 years old, I found out that I had a classmate who got money for grades. And I thought, that's a great idea. And so I immediately took that idea to my dad, and he looked at me very seriously. He was one of the kindest men I've ever known. But he looked at me and he said, Evelyn, if I ever think you're not doing your best in school, you'll be paying me. And I thought, oh my. And he told me that he would, if there was ever a squabble with my teachers, that he would take my teacher's part. I mean, Mom said that too. They were very, very united in that. So I had that background of integrity, hard work, education, and I had family all over who were very supportive. I mean, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents. Another thing was very lucky for me. But all of that is important when you think about a position that involves really public service, that you have. It's not just a job, it is a responsibility to work hard and do your best for the people that your position affects. And so you don't just do things because they're fun, you do things because they need to be done, and they need to be done well. And I appreciated that very much. I mean, even in retrospect, very much. And I had never really thought about being a lawyer. I didn't even know any lawyers when I was young, let alone any women lawyers. And yet when I was in junior high, I read a book about the Salem witch trials. And I remembered thinking how unjust it was that she was just, doing what she needed to do. She loved her family, and somebody just decided they didn't like her for one reason or another. And she was in all sorts of a bad way and bad trouble because of that, very unjustly. And so it sparked my interest in defending people. And I thought, I wish I'd been there to defend her. And of course, you talk about doing other things too when you're in junior high and high school. And my mother really wanted me to go into music, and I like music, but we were talking about going to Bethany and possibly majoring in music. And my dad, who never talked very much, really, especially at the dinner table, just said to me, whatever happened to being a lawyer? And anybody who has ever thought about being a mentor or who has had mentors, don't ever underestimate the importance of doing that, because I'll never forget that moment. Because I looked at my father and I knew he loved me. And I thought, if my dad thinks I can be a lawyer, I think maybe I can be a lawyer. And so that was my dream then. And I wasn't sure I could get into law school. I knew I had to get a degree. And so when I went to Bethany, I did enjoy music, but I soon realized that that was not going to be how I wanted to make my living. And so I I thought, if I don't get into law school, what should I do? So I decided business would be a good plan B. And I think that even the business background has served me well in thinking about resources. And then after I went to law school, I kind of thought I'd practice in Kansas City. I mean, the city lights had always been kind of a vague attraction for me, having grown up in such a rural area. I mean, Smith County is just about as far away from a big city as you can get. I mean, it was 5 hours west to Denver, 6 hours east to Kansas City, and about 4 hours south to Wichita. So it was very rural. And I thought maybe I wanted to do that, but it didn't pan out right away. And a lawyer from Oberlin, Kansas, in Northwest Kansas, which is only 90 miles from where I grew up, came to interview at Washburn Law School. And so I thought, well, that's so close to home. I have to do this interview. And I thought it would give me good practice and we'd see how it goes. And Elmo and I just really hit it off. He was so intelligent, so nice. And Elmo offered me a job. And so I took it and went to Northwest Kansas. And I'm so glad I did, because what a great background for a judge. I mean, you can't really narrow your practice in a rural practice. I did contract law. It was the middle of the farm crisis. So we defended farmers to the FDIC, and we did taxes. I had domestic clients, and my first jury trial that I did from beginning to sentencing was a criminal case. And so that wide variety of background, I think, contributed to why I ended up on the path I did. And then my husband, who was the superintendent of schools, got a job in this area in the eastern part of Kansas. And so I got a job in a larger law firm with some very well-respected attorneys, some of who were from Norton County, Kansas, Dale Summers, Gary Sebelius, and Tom Wright, which is who I ended up working with primarily. And Tom Wright was another one who had the utmost integrity and was so skilled at practicing law. And with him, and as an associate, eventually a partner, and then a managing partner at that firm, I learned so much about how to try lawsuits, to be a trial lawyer. And so that was my emphasis at the time, primarily civil and mostly defense. And so at the time that there came an opening for a district judge, I had this experience that was wide, and I felt like I understood what should go on in a courtroom pretty well. And so I applied for the position. And I was one of the 3 candidates whose name was sent to the governor, and I was lucky enough to be chosen by the governor at that time. And so I became a district judge, and I began with a domestic rotation. I had a criminal rotation and presided over like 80 jury trials.
And Evelyn, just so we make sure everybody understands, when we say district judge, we mean that's the trial level of the Kansas court system.
Right.
So
every kind of case is filed in district court. And so I was able to preside over many cases. And then as chief judge later on, I was able to learn administrative things, which was very helpful to my decision to apply to the Supreme Court, because as you know, the Supreme Court does an appellate practice, and I had done some of that, but most of my practice had been in the district court, in the trial court. And this, of course, is an appellate court where we review what happened below, and we do a lot of reading and writing of opinions. But we have another aspect too. And so when this position on the Supreme Court became open, I felt like, at least I hoped, that I would be able to contribute from my experiences, something that would add something valuable to the the whole, the collective whole that the 7 members of the Supreme Court put together, because we do a lot of things collectively, which is a very interesting, as you know, most decisions are made collectively.
Right. I'll just mention quickly that the 7 members that Evelyn has mentioned of our current Supreme Court, the other members besides Justice Wilson are Chief Justice Luker, who's only the 2nd woman to serve as the Chief Justice. She also originally hails from the western part of the state. She grew up in the Goodland area and is a Washburn Law grad, and also served on the Shawnee County District Court. Then we do everything in seniority at the Supreme Court, right, Evelyn?
Right.
So the next person most senior to Marla is Eric Rosen. Eric Rosen grew up in Topeka. He had time in private practice, and then he also served on the district bench before coming to the Supreme Court. The next person is Dan Biles, who grew up down around Augusta, El Dorado, that area. He was in private practice. He was a journalist first, and then in private practice for many years after graduating from Washburn Law, and then came to the court from private practice in Johnson County. The next most senior person is Caleb Stiegel, who grew up in Lawrence and is a KU Law graduate. Caleb had some years as a judicial clerk and then in private practice, both in a large and small firm. Then he was counsel to the governor. And he served on the Court of Appeals for a short time before coming to the Kansas Supreme Court. Then Evelyn, and then the two more junior members of the court are KJ Wall. KJ was also spent time in private practice. He spent some time working in the insurance industry, spent some time as counsel in the insurance industry, spent some time working for the court, actually doing special projects some time ago, came to the court to replace Chief Justice Nuss when he retired. And then our newest member of our Kansas Supreme Court now is Melissa Taylor Standridge, who spent many years on the Kansas Court of Appeals and in private practice before coming to the court. She replaced me when I retired. So that's the current lineup. And there's quite an assortment of people who've appointed all those people to the Supreme Court. Evelyn, maybe we can talk just a little bit about how people end up at the Supreme Court, the selection method for it. You mentioned that you were one of 3 names sent to the governor for the district court. Maybe it would be helpful to just explain kind of the 3 various methods people reach the bench in Kansas.
Sure. And it's kind of, it is very varied how people get to the bench. The Supreme Court, under our Constitution, we have a Supreme Court nominating commission who is, some are appointed by the governor, some are elected by lawyers. And so there is a commission of, let's see, there are 9 people on the Supreme Court nominating commission, and the chair is a non-voting chair. So I had to apply for the Supreme Court, and I submit an application. It's a very involved application. Then they have transcripts, writing samples, letters of support or recommendation. And the nominating commission examines all of those materials. There's a background check that's done by the KBI. And then there are interviews by the Supreme Court nominating commission. We were all interviewed. And then when the Supreme Court nominating commission chooses 3 members, there's another extensive background check by the KBI. And then the governor's office also investigates and has a separate application form. And then the governor chooses one of those 3 applicants, has 60 days to do it. The Court of Appeals, which is an intermediate appellate court, was created by statute. And so the legislature has determined how they are selected, which is kind of a modified federal system in giving the governor the ability to make a choice subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. But our governor also has taken the additional step of having a nominating commission of sorts to help her look through the qualified candidates who also she's asked to apply for the position, and those people are interviewed and their application is looked at much like the Supreme Court nominating commission does, but that's at the election of the governor. And then at the district court level, some of the district judges are elected in a partisan election. And so they have to file for the primary election if there's more than one person who is in their particular party. And then they stand for general election and they campaign. The other district courts in Kansas, and we have 31 districts. Some of them are like Shawnee County, where they also have a district nominating commission that operates much the same way the Supreme Court nominating commission does. All of us have to stand for retention, though. Unlike the federal judges who are appointed under the Constitution, the federal Constitution, who do not stand for retention.
They're appointed for life, appointed for life, for good behavior. Yeah.
Right, subject to good behavior. They can
Subject to
be
good behavior.
impeached by Congress and then tried by the Senate. But if that doesn't happen, then they're for life. But we stand in Supreme, every judge who is nominated by a commission has to stand the first general election after they've served for 1 year. And then after that, they would get a certain amount of time. And Supreme Court justices get 6 years and the other judges get 4.
Right. And then in those partisan election districts, it's about half and half, right, Evelyn? About half and half of the district, about half and half of the district judges in Kansas are one method or the other. In the regular general partisan election kind of routine that we're all used to in other kinds of races, those are 4-year terms as well. So the district court's 4-year terms, Court of Appeals 4-year terms, Supreme Court 6-year terms in the ordinary course. But this year, just point of fact, because we have 3 newer members of the court, who replaced myself and 2 of the more senior folks who retired within the last few years. And we have 3 people who just naturally in their cycle of terms come up. There will be 6 of 7 of the Supreme Court justices on the retention ballot in November, and about half of the Court of Appeals. So it'll be a crowded ballot this year. Everyone on the Supreme Court other than Justice Rosen is on the retention ballot this year. So kind of
yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting too that in the election districts, it's completely up to the voters to make, do all of those investigations to make their own determinations as to the qualifications of the judges who are on the ballot. And of course, you can do that also with the judges who are on the retention ballot, but there are additional layers too that have, you can know that there's been very, very in-depth examinations of
right. You know what went before they ever made it to the bench. And then the other thing about appellate judges, this is sometimes true in the district court as well, but not always. It depends on the type of cases that are being handled and the degree of formality that decisions are handed down with. But we have a colleague, Evelyn has a current colleague, I have a past colleague who likes to say that the appellate judiciary is required to show its work. Some of us who are older remember that phrase from math class when we were in elementary school, when you were told to show your work. And what he means by that is that when a case is decided at the appellate level, and we're going to get back to that in just a second, how it gets there and how it gets decided. But once it is decided, whoever is the author of the majority opinion and any additional opinions that might be written, either a concurrence agreeing with the result but getting there a different way, or a dissent that disagrees with the result and may disagree on reasoning as well. All of those opinions are written and filed, and most of them are, nearly all of them, certainly at the Supreme Court level, all of them are available to the public to view. And I should just mention this just by way of further investigation that Evelyn mentions. There are at least a couple of places you can go and get more information about the justices and read their opinions and look at their bios and find out more about them or about the fact that they're standing for retention. The first one I want to mention is the Kansas Court's website, which is the official website of the Kansas judiciary. You find it on the web by going to KS Courts, plural, usual spelling, all run together, no capitals, .org. And if you go to that website, you can find a wealth of information about your court system in Kansas, the state court system. There's also a website supporting retention this year. It can be found by, you can just search this on Google, Keep Kansas Courts Impartial. It also has bios of the justices and talks a little bit more about some of the matters related to retention this year. So anyway, there are multiple sources. Of course, you can also Google the justices' names and find out more about them. Evelyn, you've told us quite a bit about your background and kind of what led you to think about, gee, I think I can be a lawyer and then maybe a judge. We hear a lot of stories about various courts, right? We read a lot in the paper and online about various courts deciding various issues. It can be a little confusing for average folks, for ordinary folks who are not caught up in the court system at all, to know who's being talked about, you know, who they are, how do they relate to one another. We've talked about, in particular, the Kansas Supreme Court. Another court that gets reported on a lot, of course, is the U.S. Supreme Court. Can you explain to folks just what's the difference and how can people tell?
You know, I think the easiest way to look at that is that we essentially have two parallel systems that are operating at the same time. Sometimes those systems cross, but most of the time they stay separate, and that is the federal system and the state system. And so most cases are filed in the state system. You think about divorces and even probate, almost all of the juvenile cases are filed in state court. But then you get into some cases that might be filed in state court, might be filed in federal court, such as murder, drug cases at times. But the federal cases usually start in their own district court and then go up to their federal or circuit courts of appeals, and then go up to the United States Supreme Court. In our system, most of our state cases are filed in trial court and or district court. If there's an appeal, if someone's unhappy with the result, then they are filed to the Court of Appeals, or some cases go directly to the Supreme Court by statute. And most of the time, the Kansas Supreme Court is the last court of appeals. So our decisions are final. But if on occasion there is what we call a federal question or federal constitutional issue, then the person at the level of the Kansas Supreme Court, if they're unhappy, they can file what's called a petition for certiorari to the United States Supreme Court to ask them to take a look at the federal issues that exist in the case that we had before us.
Right. And just to give you a little bit, everybody's a little bit of idea about scope. The Kansas court system decides thousands and thousands of cases a year. The Court of Appeals, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. The state Supreme Court, hundreds of cases. A very small fraction, you know, literally the whole time I was on the Kansas Supreme Court, maybe a handful, I could probably say a handful, a literal handful of cases ended up actually being appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So usually the U.S. Supreme Court is hearing cases from, obviously there are 49 other states possibly that can generate cases that might end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. There are all kinds of other administrative agencies whose cases can end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. So most Kansas law is made in the Kansas court system and the state court system, the law that's judge made. Let's talk about that for one quick second, Evelyn, if we can. I used to say sometimes when I did forums like this, that in essence, there are three sources of law. I mean, this is oversimplifying, but for a purpose, I think it helps it more to be more understandable. One of the big kahuna of law as a source is, of course, the federal and state constitution. And those documents are the people's documents. They have language that the people have selected, both in the federal system and in the state system. So constitutional law is one source of law. We've mentioned a couple times statute. And when we say statute, we of course mean the thing that we all learned in school, how a bill becomes law, something that's legislatively designed, ultimately signed by the executive. If it's the federal system, it's the president. If it's the state system, it's the governor, and becomes law. And that's statutory law. So that's another source of law. That's another source that parties might argue to the court to favor their position. And it's another source that the court may rely upon in deciding the case. But there is a third source of law, if you will, and that's case law. And so when I talked a moment ago about judges showing their work through written opinions, well, each of those opinions makes up altogether a body of case law. And that law is, in some respects, correctly termed judge-made, because it arises out of the operation of how those cases are decided and how they relate to one another and which ones control issues of the future, et cetera. So there are really kind of three sources of law. I like to say that, Evelyn, just to make it clear. So we have three levels of courts generally, both in the federal system and the state system. We have trial courts, courts of appeal, and then the Supreme Court. We also have these three overarching sources of law that the court may end up relying upon. And the court relies upon them because those are the sources of law to which the parties to the litigation or the criminal case or the regulatory matter direct the court. I think one of the most important other items of information Evelyn and I want you to take away from this presentation is this idea that courts don't just sit around and wait for an idea to pop into their head so that they can write an opinion about it. That courts decide issues that are brought to them by litigants and their lawyers. And those are what get argued to them, and that's what they decide.
Yeah, and I think a really important point about the judge-made law that we were talking about is that we're not just coming up with an idea there either.
Right.
We come up with an opinion because we are trying our best to interpret the law that has been passed by the people or the people's representatives. And it's not always crystal clear, and we can only decide cases or controversies. And so somebody filed a lawsuit against somebody else claiming that this isn't clear to me what the law is. And so you judges have to put your heads together and try to figure out what the legislature was trying to say or what the Constitution was trying to say. It's not just that we think, well, this would be a good idea. We're some super legislative cabal. That's not how we do it. We have to use the law that there is and to make sense of it as best we can. And
that includes cases decided before. That's the other thing that some people don't appreciate. And the court is never writing on a blank slate, because there has been some case in the past that was at least tangentially related to the subject matter of that case. And we have to try to adhere to prior decisions as well. That's a concept, the Latin phrase called stare decisis. So if you hear judges talking about stare decisis, that's what they're talking about, is the fact that in theory, courts are bound by prior decisions as well, unless they have a very good reason for changing their mind.
Exactly. So this is what they thought then. So this is what, we're using all of that to. Right,
exactly. It's a pretty cozy environment, I guess I would say. There's a lot going on in there. So let's talk a little bit about, let's just say now, Evelyn, where a case has arrived by whatever route to the Kansas Supreme Court. Can you just we talked about showing our work substantively in terms of writing the opinions and explaining decisions, but can you tell everybody just the procedure? What happens? Case gets filed, an appeal gets filed in the Kansas Supreme Court. Then what? Right.
The appeal is filed by the litigants or the parties in the lawsuit. And those are the people who really have, they've either filed it or they are defending it, or for some reason they're very interested in the outcome. And so they either file what we call a brief. It's not really very brief, but it lists the facts of the case and the issues that they're appealing, because we look at issues. What issues have they brought up for us to decide? And then they write down in this brief, what are the facts that apply to this issue? What are the laws that apply to each one of these issues? And this is how we think you ought to decide it, Judge. And the other side does that too. However many parties there are, they all file a brief for us to look at. And if this has gone through the Court of Appeals, we also look at what they decided they thought the law was, and that also can be very persuasive. And then we have other attorneys. Each of the justices will read those briefs and read the law and the facts and make some decisions. And we also have some help from our research attorneys who also do that and read the record to make sure that what the litigants are saying actually happened, and they find the places where it did. We look at all of that, and then the parties come and give us oral arguments to try to, convince us to hold their way. After that, then all 7 of the justices will meet together and conference each case, and each justice will give his or her perspective on how they think that that the law should be interpreted, how the issues should be determined and decided. And then the opinion is written up. And even after that, we're still looking at, is this the right decision? Did we come to the right decision in the right way? Because when I was a district judge, it was just me. I look at the facts and the law and I decide what the answer is. And then if that's not good enough, well, you have to go to the appellate courts to get it changed. But here on the Supreme Court, we all talk about it. And trust me, all 6 of the people that I work with are super smart. And you, by the way, are super smart too. Retired Justice Carol Beier. I'm glad I got to work with you too. But it's a very involved process, and we work very hard to try to come to the right answers for the right reasons.
Right. And so someone drafts the opinion, someone who ends up, there's a vote after that conference. Yes. Near the end of that conference, after all that discussion has happened, and it can be very lively, yes. Sometimes loud. After all that discussion kind of comes to a conclusion, there'll be a vote, obviously, and among the 7, and someone who is in the majority. Sometimes it's unanimous. I mean, it's often unanimous, but sometimes not. And if it's not, then one of the people who's in the majority on the vote will be assigned the writing of the opinion, and that person will draft and then circulate the opinion. And if there are other opinions, they'll be drafted and circulated among the justices. And as Evelyn indicated, there can be more discussion prompted by the drafts, because sometimes the person who's drafted has had a new idea or a different idea, or someone gets a new idea along the way. So this can be quite a long process. And then every Friday, generally, the appellate courts file decisions that are ready for publication that week. And that website to which I directed you earlier, kscourts.org, you can read all the different decisions that are filed by the appellate courts there and get a good idea of, you can look up what Evelyn has written, you can look up past decisions I wrote, or anything that any of our colleagues have written too. You can find it on that website. So it's a long process, a highly deliberative process, sometimes lively discussion-led process. Tell us, Evelyn, I know I didn't know this, frankly, until I joined the court, but I know it now, but I'm not sure everyone does. There are some other things the Kansas Supreme Court does too as part of its job. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I would like to. And that actually was one of the very important reasons why I applied for the Supreme Court, because I knew that a great deal of our time would be spent in administering all of the courts of the state of Kansas. That's our constitutional responsibility. And so we have a lot of work to do in that regard. Each justice, who's, except for the Chief Justice, who has all sorts of other duties, of course, we are all departmental justice liaisons to at least some of the 31 judicial districts in Kansas. And my assigned area is essentially the southern and southeast corner of Kansas. And we also have committees. The Access to Justice Committee is mine, the specialty courts, the Language Access Committee, and I have the Judicial Conduct Committee, and those some other committees that are assigned to my primary responsibility. And then we also have all sorts of, I mean, there are many, we have thousands of employees, and so human resources, we have the Office of Judicial Administration that to some large degree we supervise, and all of the technology for the courts in Kansas. We're responsible to make sure that we have records all over the state that are accurate and complete, and much of that has been digital. We were very, very active over the pandemic because suddenly all the courthouses were closed, but we still had people arrested who had to be able to appear before a judge, and we still had people who were needing protection from abuse. We still had cases with children that had to be dealt with immediately. So we had to figure out all of that, how to do that so that people would still have access to judges and to be able to file their cases, even though they couldn't get in the courthouse during the pandemic.
That was an enormous undertaking. I was still around for the first couple of months of that, and it was just daily building the plane while flying it, of course, like so many others were during the early days of the pandemic.
Yes.
We were talking briefly earlier today, Evelyn and I, about the fact that the pandemic has in so many ways remade the work world, and that has happened in part in terms of the judiciary as well. But it was absolutely imperative, of course, that certain cases couldn't stop. They couldn't stop for a worldwide pandemic. They had people who were in need of immediate resolutions of issues, and the courts found a way to get that done. But it was an enormous undertaking. So we're gonna wrap up our portion in just a couple minutes. But before we do that, I just got a couple last questions for Evelyn.
Okay. I'll try to be brief. I go on too long.
You'll be fine. So just a couple things, like what is the most enjoyable aspect of your position, and what is the most difficult? If you can sum those two up for all of us.
Easily the most enjoyable aspect of being a justice has been the opportunity to be able to work so closely with such smart people who the other justices and myself, they're all just such good people who really want to do the very, very best that we all can for Kansas, and to protect the rule of law, to do what we are here to do as best as we can. And honestly, on the farm, as a district judge, as a trial lawyer, I've never worked harder, but it is so gratifying. And I know the other justices do too. I just treasure the time and the ability to work with those super smart, dedicated people, including you, Carol. I enjoyed that, at least for some months. That's the best. The hardest, I would definitely say, is to look at the facts of some of the most difficult cases, because part of my job that I cannot shirk or shy away from is to look at some of the most horrific things that people do to people, and in order to try to come to the correct results on whatever issues that I have to decide. But that was the hardest thing I did as a district judge, and it is still the hardest thing I have to do as a justice.
Yeah, I can echo both of those. I would just add this though, we talk about the rule of law. It's kind of a phrase we hear a lot. And we've been hearing it a lot recently as citizens, the rule of law. And I'd like to just kind of circle back to that for a second about what we mean when we say that. And I guess if I'm going to define it, I would say, well, or define it or contain it or attempt to describe it. I would say that what that means, I mean, it really is the bedrock principle of our entire democratic republic and of our state. And that is that there are rules that apply to all of us. They apply to the mighty, they apply to the weak, they apply to the rich, they apply to the poor, they apply to everyone, well-loved or despised. And that's what we have instead of kind of what's seen as the counterpoint phrase. It's said in a gendered way, old-fashioned rule of man or rule of men, which just means that no person is above the law, that we are all subject to it. And that's what Evelyn's talking about, having a role in protecting and safeguarding, and that's what she's required to be governed by.
And I think sometimes, I think you would probably also echo that. That takes a lot of courage sometimes. I know, just remembering some of the cases that I had as a district judge, I would literally, in some, murder cases or other cases that had very dramatic facts, I would see an entire courtroom of people who were angry, who wanted me to, I guess, put my finger on the scale of justice, if you will. And I had to look at all of those people and summon up the courage to be able to say, no, we're not taking a vote. This is based on the evidence and the law that has been given to us by the Constitution and by the legislature. And that must carry the day. It can't not carry the day. And even in a group like that, they respected that. They respect the rule of law because that's the way it is for everyone.
Right. It has to be for everybody. I don't know if there are any other Michael Connolly, Harry Bosch fans out there, but everybody counts or nobody counts. It's the saying that character always said, everybody counts or nobody counts. Well, let's wrap it up, just our little conversation, Evelyn, and take some questions from those of you who are watching. I believe, Ty,
I'm
do
sorry
you have
that my light went out. We like to save money here at the state, so if somebody's not moving fast enough,
I saw you wave, and for a moment I thought, wow, fancy. They got those motion activated lights.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was they only turn off. Oh, how funny.
Oh yeah, they're afraid we'll forget to turn them off, so they'll turn them on weekend. Sorry.
It's the modern technology substitute for our parents, Evelyn. Turn off the light. Okay. All right. Ty, do you have some questions for Evelyn?
I do. Yeah. So I'm Ty Edwards. I'm with Women for Kansas Leadership. And I just want to thank both of you for this wonderful conversation you've let all of us listen in on. And we have some really great questions. So I hope we have time to get through all of them. So several of them relate to how does our state of Kansas compare in both the selection and the retention of judges to other states?
Okay. I certainly don't have a command of all 49, but I will say that there are varying methods in varying states. The plan that we follow, it's called the Missouri plan, was one way it was described at one point, and it's otherwise described as merit selection, where there's that commission made up of both lawyers and people who are not lawyers, and they send nominees to the governor, and then the governor selects. That plan was devised originally in Missouri, and it was adopted back in the 1958-59 time period in Kansas, because actually there was wide support for it at that time. In fact, the Chamber of Commerce was one of the organizations pushing it then, because something had happened with the appointment of a justice to the Kansas Supreme Court, and was just way too political what had occurred. I won't go into all the details. Everybody can look it up. But you know, that it was selected for that reason. So there are some states who have that plan, who follow some version of the Missouri plan. There are others who have partisan elections for their high courts. So it varies from state to state.
Awesome. Okay, what do you think are the most important qualifications for a Supreme Court justice?
Great. Evelyn, you want to take this one?
Well, I think it's very important that you have someone who is honorable, ethical, and has a lot of education in the law, whether that has come through experience with different cases, whether it has come through the study of cases. And I know that Carol was on the Court of Appeals and had done lots and lots of cases. I was in the district court for a long time, so I saw cases from that level. But I think it's important to, you know, really most of all, to have someone who is not only a very serious student of the law, but someone who also has utmost integrity. That's extremely important.
Okay, this kind of relates similarly to that question, but a little more logistical. So I have been told that while your CV and experience are important, the interview is a crucial test in the process of impressing the various nominating commissions. Do you agree or disagree? And for women who are considering applying, what do you recommend they do to strengthen their interview skills, since it may have been many years since qualified candidates had interviewed for a position?
Great question. Yeah, great question. Do you mind, Evelyn, if I shoot?
Oh, go ahead, please.
Okay. I would say I do think the interview is important. And I think the number one thing to do to prepare for it is to practice for it. I mean, literally to practice for it. I'll say, when I went up to an interview with the Court of Appeals, at that time, of course, all the interviews conducted in person, and there were 9 people, and I think I might have met one of them before. So it was me and the 9 people arrayed around the table. The day that I was going to come to my interview, I had to travel from Wichita to Topeka. I was living in Wichita then. And my 3 best girlfriends called me that morning as I was getting ready to leave my house and said, "We're taking you." And I said, "Great." And so we hopped into the car and we said, we'll spend half the time on the way to Topeka just visiting, and then the other half we're practicing. So I had a very kind of spur of the moment, rudimentary kind of practice for my interview. But I know that now people take that somewhat more seriously, and I think that is appropriate. I think it's hard to face 9 people who are trying to ask you challenging questions and maybe get behind what's in your written submission, etc. And so I think practice is key. And I will tell you this too, this is just a quick little kind of anecdote story. But when I walked into that room, quite nervous, as you might imagine, and sat down with those 9 really smart, really experienced, you know, from all over the state folks who were nice, but still intimidating. The first question I was asked was, "Tell us something we don't know about you from reading your submission." And so I always warn people that may be a question you get. I had not prepared an answer to that question, but the first thing that came to my mind was, I'm a person who has wonderful friends. And then I told them about my girlfriends. So anyway, be prepared to go outside your materials and talk about something that's not represented there, because I think it's highly likely you might get a question like that.
Wonderful. Evelyn, do you want to add anything to that?
I agree. There also is a judicial nominating commission book that is available that has a whole list of questions that might be asked. It's geared toward nominating commissions, giving them questions they might want to ask, but that was helpful to me too. And I second what Carol said about the practice. I also had some good friends who did that for me, and it is very helpful.
That's wonderful. Okay, can you share the facts of the ruling by the Kansas Supreme Court in 2019 that declared our right to personal autonomy?
I can't really talk about the merits of that particular case. And Evelyn shouldn't either. We are limited to a certain degree about what we can talk about on outside of written opinion. And
Well,
this makes
that case is still pending too. so
yeah
we
this
can't talk
this
about
this
that.
makes it kind of impossible for us to really address merits. But I will say that the opinion itself can be found on the website, and so folks can go there and read it if they'd like to.
And that's also the kansascourts.org website?
Yes, KS Courts with an S on the end of it .org, kscourts.org, all lowercase, and you can look up any case you would like to, including that one, and read it.
So why don't our courts have dedicated funding instead of depending on the legislature?
Oh, interesting.
Well,
You've been more recently involved in the budget discussions, Evelyn. You want to try to talk about those, sir?
well, the Constitution divides powers of the government into three different branches. And one of the branches is the judicial branch, one is the legislative branch, and then one is the executive, the governors in the executive. The judicial branch holds the purse. And so
The legislative.
I'm
branch.
sorry, no, I said that wrong. Oh my gosh, yes. I should not think about something that when I'm racing ahead from what I'm saying. But yes, the legislative branch has the purse strings. And so we don't get to, we can try to influence them and tell them how much money we think we need in order to do what we need to do. But it's the legislature who decides how much money we get.
There is a change that's just happened that's interesting, and I don't want to belabor it because it gets down in the weeds pretty far. But for a long time, the part of the funds that flowed to the judicial branch were fee dependent. So if someone goes to file a lawsuit and they pay a fee, a portion of that fee would go into the pot that helped to fund all of these folks who work in the judicial branch and who deliver justice throughout the state. And that got changed this year so that the courts are less fee dependent and more going to be just recipients of general fund money, which the thinking is that it will be a more stable source of funds for the judiciary, which is necessary for a lot of reasons. So I'll just mention that real quick. That was a win for the judicial branch, I think, this year in the legislature. I know Marla Lukert, our chief, has expressed pleasure that passed and was changed.
Wonderful. How does a sitting justice demonstrate objectivity?
Evelyn, you want to talk, or you want me? Go ahead. You go first.
How do we demonstrate objectivity? We have to be objective. We have to be objective in every single case. So if there's ever a case in which I can't be objective, then I recuse myself. And the
want to explain what recuse means?
Recuse means I step away. It's really the only opportunity that I have to step away, because we don't just get to, we don't have the ability to say, well, this case looks kind of hard, so I don't want to do it. You're expected to do each and every case unless there's a reason you can't be objective. So if my brother's a litigant, I'm going to step away by recusing, just by an example.
Yeah. We have an obligation to sit. I mean, that's really important. You can't just shirk work. We have an obligation to sit, but then if there's something about the case, I had a criminal case one time. I was a crime victim in my younger life, and the MO of the perpetrator was identical. And I read it and I thought, I can't do this. So, I mean, it wasn't a family relationship. It wasn't a business interest. It wasn't an investment I had or but I looked at it and I thought, I can't do this one. So I knew I couldn't, and I stepped back.
Yep. So it's just a little birdie in the back of your head that says, nope, I don't think I can say no to one side or the other. It just would be too hard for me. And so that the scales have to be even.
Right.
Hang out.
Okay, and then I think this will be our last one. Let me make sure I'm keeping up to date here. All right, I think our last one will be, can you tell us about the camaraderie between the justices and former justices? What is the colleague dynamic like in your workplace?
Great. I'll talk about this for a second if you want, Evelyn, and then you can chime in. I gotta say, it is like a family. And most of us know this. We have small groups at our workplaces that we spend a lot of time with, and we spend a lot. I now should speak in this past tense, but we spent a lot of time together. And for the last, I think now it'd be 12 or 13 years, the Kansas Supreme Court goes on the road once or twice a year too. And so we travel together, we eat our meals together, we have exceedingly long conferences and meetings together all the time. We argue a lot, more than any ordinary family, I'm sure, because arguing is part of our job. And you just get to know one another quite well. And I can say unequivocally that I am very, very fond of my colleagues, and it just builds that sort of fondness naturally, even though we frequently disagree pointedly with one another. Evelyn?
I agree wholeheartedly. And, for until I went on the Supreme Court, the other members of the court had always been, I guess, in some form, my boss. They could overrule my opinions as a judge, and they were the ultimate decision makers when I was a lawyer. So the vision of them was rather intimidating, and I didn't know them very well at all. And I can say honestly, also without equivocation, they are all so generous with their time and with me. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and they are all excellent justices. And so I feel so privileged and honored to be able to call them my colleagues. Really, truly.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Justice Wilson and former Justice Beier, for sharing this conversation and this information with us. We really appreciate it. Of course, we are here from Women for Kansas hosting this event. We also want to thank Jenny Pierce and Tammy Smith for their logistical and technical support for this event. And of course, thank you to our wonderful Women for Kansas colleague, Kathy Webb, for introducing both of you. I'd just like to let all of our viewers know that you can, of course, learn more about Women for Kansas at womenforkansas.org, or of course on our Facebook page where you are right now, many of you watching this live. You can always subscribe to our newsletter called News We Can Use at our website. We have chapters all around the state that hold all kinds of different meetings and different events that you can also learn about there. And you will be able to see this event and other events that we've done in the past on our YouTube channel in a few days. And you can even look at our recent June 4th conference, What to Do in 22, What's at Stake for Kansans, about the elections of 2022. So thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful Juneteenth. I hope you have time to go out into your community and celebrate this holiday with our community members. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.